they lost their North Star. They lost their North Star of uh, outstanding work, meaning that was always the goal before. And there was room for all kinds of work. There would be films and so-so TV series, but like the goal was this excellence. You wanted to be associated with something really good and not just something that like lasted beyond this era. And it was shameful to do something for money. And sometimes you had to, but you didn't feel good about it. And what happened like 8, 10 years ago is you had this streaming.
What's good? It's your boy, the Black Anglo-Saxon, your favorite neighborhood political scientist, back here with another video. Today, we're going to be talking about this interesting conversation I saw between Coleman Hughes with this young lady who is a individual in the film industry. I found it pretty interesting because I saw and heard some overlap as it relates to the political environment and some of the conversations that I always have about models and how those models influence and entrench on other industries. And I think it speaks to the value systems that America lacks and why things are eroding as it is. And it's not just these one-offs that a lot of people would like to believe, but it's rather a system that is in place that allows people to basically suck the life out of everything through monetization and making everything superficial as a result of it. So I'm gonna just go ahead and jump into it. It's a pretty decently long video, but so this is Justine Bateman and Coleman Hughes. We're gonna go ahead and listen to this.
You must know a lot of people in Hollywood. I don't know if that's accurate given that your acting careers in the past, but my real question is like, what window can you give into what it is, like what the culture of Hollywood is like in these mob mentality respects?
Sure. Yeah, acting's in the past, but I'm, been in the business since I was 16 years old. It's actually, you're actually wind up in a much better position once you're a screenwriter and director or producer because you are gathering people into your film versus being somebody who's, auditioning to be included. So yeah, I've been in the business since 1982, 1982. And yeah, I know a lot of people. And one of the fun things about being in the business this long is the people that were assistants when I was younger are, running this and running that. That's a
Keep that in frame because there's good context in terms of what it means to transition from different generation to the next generation and how we have to layer these time frames as it relates to how we're looking at how things have evolved to basically come into a space where we are devolving. Again, she's saying that basically she's been able to see the pinnacle and people who were working with her horizontally are now the people who are actually running and making the moves.
fun thing to see, or somebody who was like a lower level agent or an agent's assistant or a runner in the mailroom is now one of the partners. So yeah, I know a lot of people in the business, of course. And, and I love the entertainment business and I love all the people that are called to it. It's a very special collection of people with, from the executives to the crew, with a very specific skill set, varying skill sets, but, very unique skill sets. So yeah, well, I'll say here's what's happened. I'll give you the shorter version of what's happened in the business specific to what you just asked. And I have an essay coming out in tablet. They're doing a physical magazine, that kind of talks about that. It's like a small city to get a film done, and to create some sort of fanciful story or reenact some real story or something that wasn't there before, just create something out of nothing. So you're also willing to, in most situations, it's rare to not have this, but you're willing to earn a living where you're not sure how you're getting the next check. So it's a constant, you are a risk taker financially, you're a risk taker emotionally, creatively, everything. You have to be. That stopped. It's funny, I went to school late in life.
So this is gig jobs before gig jobs, crazily enough. And so understand what she's saying is that they're in an environment, and again, the politics works a lot like this in terms of you are dependent on your relationships and your proximity to the projects themselves, which is why a lot of people don't, for a lack of a better word, stand on their square when you have certain things that may sound like are a toss up when it comes to why would they make that decision? Well, they made that decision because 5 years, 3 years down the line, they may need to be called on or may need their number called for a particular project, and they don't want to necessarily isolate themselves. So that's kind of the environment that is similar and has overlap in terms of how the film industry seems to operate as well as the political industry. And you see it a lot in terms of how, politicians, especially now, since we've gotten this into this space where politicians have become and started chasing to be media conglomerates as well, where there's huge overlap in terms of their parties and what do you call it? The people that they hang around, their friend groups and inner circles.
I was at UCLA from 2012 to 2016. So I was like I was the bash right before you were there. I was at UCLA. And I'm really glad I wasn't there during that shutdown time. I would have been really sad about that. Anyway, we can get into education later. Um, in entertainment, what happened, I believe, about, you know, well, there's other things, and not to make this too long of an answer, but, and I've written essays about this, how the tech companies, once they decided to use our work as content for their websites, they, they changed a lot of things. The way work is treated, the way work is spoken about. They don't call them films and series. They just call it content because it's just stuff for their shelves, really. They changed the financial ecosystem in a lot of ways that are extremely detrimental to the filmmakers and the crew and everybody involved. But one of the things that happened.
Now, what she's talking about, and I'm gonna go ahead and go to the solo, because what she's talking about right here in terms of it going from people just making films and being able to create these masterpieces and being able to be risk and take risk versus now these tech bros, the tech companies have created this ecosystem. And this is where I say it's a problem with the shifting and the moving in and out, because now you have this environment where everything is superficial. And she's going to get into it when she talks about the fact that now everything is just content. Everything doesn't necessarily have to meet a particular standard. And it goes into what my last video was when I was talking about second screens and how now they've created this ecosystem as to where they're taking this business model and basically counting on people to not actually be consuming the content. And so they're creating content with less specificity and less actual substance so that it's easily digestible. But the problem with that is, and what she'll get into later, is that that has happened within every single industry. And so even when we had these conversations about Donald Trump being on a and being on a binge, what we have to realize is that Congress has done a very bad job in passing laws. And so there is lack of substance when it comes to the creation and policy around how to basically create these checks and balances. Because when you had an honest conversation around power and executive power has been increasing tenfold since we had Jackson and since we had shit, even FDR. We can go way, way, way back to when, if we want to talk about the expansion of it. And it's a result of, over time, everything becoming more superficial and less substantive. So we're gonna go ahead and just jump back into this real quick.
The film industry, for a couple reasons. They lost their North Star. They lost their North Star of outstanding work, meaning that was always the goal before. And there was room for all kinds of work. There were B films and so-so TV series, but like the goal was this excellence. You wanted to be associated with something really good and not just something that like lasted beyond this era. And it was shameful to do something for money. And sometimes you had to, but you didn't feel good about it. And what happened like 10 years ago is you had this streaming.
And what do I always tell y'all? Doing stuff just for money is a problem because it lacks substance in most cases. I'm not saying that you can't get your bag, but how you get your bag matters. And that's what she's talking about in terms of the North Star has been lost. The North Star, the plot has been lost because everything can't just amount to $1, because sometimes to get to the bag, you have to extrapolate and suck out all of the actual nutrients, all of the actual things that matter, because the business model has been shifted in a way where everything is about lacking substance because they have dumbed down the actual base so much that now you have to create basically these run-of-the-mill projects to get any traction.
Situation, you had a lot of studio executives chasing after them, not wanting to be made to look like chumps financially. So they started following that business model. That really screwed things up.
There you go.
And they also started following that North Star in as far as how they relate to the work. The studios started looking at the films and TV series just as content and started making. There's exceptions to this, of course. There have been some good work over the last 10 years, but the focus became volume content. And I can tell you, I watched 4 films in the last 3 days.
And this is why I always talk about slowing down too, because volume matters. Being inundated is a strategy to keep you off your game. Because if everything literally is coming at you at breakneck speed, you can't necessarily consume and reflect, which is why I always tell people, even when it comes to Trump is very smart because he uses that tactic in terms of basically bombarding people with so much content and so much nonsense and so much tomfoolery that you can't reflect on the last thing because in another day, he done said something else.
One of them was good. The other 3, big stars, lots of money, I know. Shit. Absolutely terrible. Phoned in performances by actors who were good actors. Bad script. Bad direction, phoned in direction. Passable production values. And like, if you're really called to this and you're gifted at this and this is where you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to do, it would rip you up inside to turn in something like that, where it just seemed like, it's not like you swung for the fences and you didn't really make it, but you tried. No, this was like, it looked like you were paid to not care.
And that's what a lot of this stuff is, from the politics, from the production of cars, from the production of clothes. All of these industries are essentially being paid to, as she put it, not care. We have to understand that. We have to understand that we are being given garbage as a business model because it is easier, cheaper, and efficient, or more efficient for the people who are making the money. But as she mentioned, when you lose the North Star, when you lose the plot of the whole thing, that's when it becomes problematic for the whole society, because everybody is now adopting this same business model. And when you do that, everything loses its substance, everything loses its nutrients or loses its nutritional value. And you can't sustain a kid or anything like that just based on sugar. You just can't live on sugar alone.
And sorry, the component that relates to what we were talking about, that oppression, the shutdown, they started through all of that behaving a lot more like a corporation than anything to do with making films and series, in that they were very much reacting to the loudest 1,000 people on social media who are committed to being angry about anything. Put a plate of pudding in front of them, they're going to get mad about it. Anything. And I think that is a lot of like intimacy through injury is what I call it. Like, you want connection with people, and it's a lot faster to get that connection through conflict than it is through, developing a friendship or something like that. So they started.
That's why rage farming is a thing. And this is why I said the Jasmine Crockett plan and trying to adopt what Trump is doing is problematic, because you're adopting and trying to take a business model that causes division and creates these cycles of trauma, of small t traumas, and are repeating it over and over and over and over in this loop without understanding the consequence to that particular model. Now, if you have a disagreement or a grievance, I'm not saying that you shouldn't speak on it, but you have to understand the consequence and what it is that you're doing and how it is that you're moving.
Reacting to that. And they went into this fear mode. And you saw a lot of reboots, a lot of remakes, a lot of sequels, a lot of, creative fear and financial fear. And that was it. So even the stuff that has been good over the last, decade has had very difficult, for the most part, difficult time getting an audience, not had the support of the promotion that's necessary. Yeah. And it's like you're in this giant Costco of stuff, and you have to paw through it to find the actual films and the actual series.
And that is an example of what I mean by censorship through giving everybody microphones. When you create a landscape and you allow everybody to speak at all different volumes with no real measure or no real check on the credibility of who's speaking, everybody and everything becomes valid. And so now you have people who are and could be very effective, who have spent 20 years of their life, 30 years of their life actually doing the research, data, the studying, and working in these specific environments to gain the knowledge versus just hopping and speaking. Because right now we're giving people platforms for just speaking. We're giving people power for just speaking, but they haven't necessarily actually done the work or been in the rooms or been in the spaces to actually understand the consequence and understand how the institutions and the functions work.
Because there's no one at the helm anymore. There's no, you also, oh God, I could go on and on about it. You got rid of the critics, really. There aren't really many critics anymore. There are people that'll do summaries.
Because everything is hating. Everything is hating. And without critics and without the critique of society, it will devolve. Because essentially, you do not have any boundaries or any checks or any guardrails in place. You need people who are critical. And I'm not talking about people who are just saying anything and just out here just talking wild and crazy, but actual critiques. Critiques. You need it.
Of some project that was released. Sometimes you'll find some good critics, like accidental critics I've read some, sort of film bloggers that really watched the film, really know the history of filmmaking, and could see where the influences were and what the metaphors were and things like that. But gosh, I don't really see that mainstream much at all.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up like going to the movie theaters like multiple times a month with my family. It was like a family thing. And, you know, as one gets older, I always ask myself, do I think that there was a golden era just because it's when I happened to be a kid and a teenager and I'm looking through at the past through rose-colored glasses? Or is it actually the case that there was a golden era and that era has passed? I think about this with music too. And, you know, I go back and listen to music from the 60s and 70s, and it kind of feels like a golden era, even though I didn't grow up with that music. So
Nah, it was a golden era because people had standards, people had values, people. What she was talking to is, and what the golden era is that it had integrity, it had actual substance. There's this episode of South Park where they talk about where Stan's dad is, he's making this integrity weed, right? And the whole idea of integrity weed is, getting the people, not only it's a play, but it's like you trying to get people back into having some type of integrity. But the joke was that, this integrity weed had everybody doing nothing. You know what I'm saying? And so it's basically what he's trying to articulate and get at is that this was an era where people had substance, integrity, values. And so when they created and when they made art and when they went about doing their day-to-day work, it had a level of weight to it. It had a level of care to it. And so it came out different. It felt different. And that's what she meant by the North Star was lost. And people was just turning in F work because that is what is now cool and okay.
that makes me feel that maybe I am being kind of objective when I say that like the 90s and 2000s was a golden era for just really good films. There was like a lot of good films being made.
And it's not even with just films, man. It's with, again, this is with everything. Because unfortunately, we are now in a society where nothing really matters except chasing the bag. And that's the problem. Because now everything is about, I'm just going to do it for the sake of getting the doll out of it. And when you approach it that way, again, get your bag, but just understand that it has its consequences. The example that I always use is, look, man, people made a lot of money off of selling crack cocaine, but crack cocaine did a lot of damage, a lot of harm to multiple generations, not just the generation that affected it. And so let me know what y'all think, man. Do y'all see the parallels between the film industry, the politics, and how all of these industries overlap? And do we and should we move back to the golden era of substance, of integrity, and not just doing it for the sake of money? Should we leave money on the table? Should that become a thing? Like, I'm going to leave the money on the table for the sake of it being good. But that's another video. I'm going to head out. Y'all be safe. It's your boy, D Black Anglo-Saxon. Your favorite neighborhood political scientist. Hit the like button, hit the share button, please subscribe, and I'll catch y'all again. Thank you very much, and have a great day.